Yogah Karmasu Kaushalam.
Moving further, we may elaborate the idea of teaching speaking with its classroom implications. We need to take into consideration even the classroom implications. One of the basic features of speaking is that it takes place in real time. Due to the time constraints that allow speakers only limited planning time, speech production requires real-time processing. This is one of the main reasons why language learners, and this is not only restricted to true beginners, tend to find speaking difficult strategies used to buy planning time, significantly shape the nature of speaking and distinguish it from writing. Crystal and Davy also mentioned time as the main factor which distinguishes written from spoken language. Consequently, instances of disfluency like hesitations, word repetitions, false starts, unfinished utterances and repairs make speaking look less neat and tidy than writing when transcribed. Therefore, one might assume that speaking is disorganized or even inferior to writing, but this is not true in reality. The formlessness of speech is an artifact of the transcription. If the judgment from this perspective of written text, spoken language will always look chaotic on paper, because first and foremost, it wasn't meant to be written down. Speech, far from being disorganized, has its own systematic patterns and structures. They are just somewhat different from those in written language. For this reason, judging speech through the measures of writing means to deny its basic characteristics and the purpose for which it is used. Likewise, if written texts like contracts, articles and reviews are rendered in spoken form, they also sound unnatural. Moreover, they are difficult to listeners to follow because they were originally created to be used for a different purpose and through a different channel. An analogy, albeit inverse, is also true for spoken texts. The spoken language is every bit as highly organized as the written and is capable of just as great as a degree of complexity. Only it is complex in a different way. In the book Spoken and Written Language, Halliday also suggests that unlike written texts, spoken texts are dynamic and tend to have a lower degree of lexical density. By dynamics, he means the tendency of spoken language to represent experience as processes. According to his words, written language describes the word in terms of its products and makes a greater use of nominalization. For example, improvement instead of improve. By contrast, when one talks, one says something happened or something was done, and one therefore tends to use more verbs. According to him, spoken discourse makes a frequent use of clauses and employs a greater variety of both syntactic and semantic relationships. He says that it is often thought that sequence of conversational discourse, they are simply strings of, you can say, rather they are intricate constructions of clauses, varying not only in the kind of interdiscrepancy, or you can say paratexis or hypertexis, but also in the logical semantic relationships involved. Spoken language is structurally patterned and displays an orderliness that is neither chaotic nor random, but rather is tightly organized and coherent. The main point that has been presented is that speaking has its own patterns and structures that are different from those of writing. For example, when compared to writing, spoken language uses more verbs and clauses rather than nominalization. Furthermore, in places where embedding or subordination might appear in a written text, speech freely adds utterances one after other. In terms of its lexical and informational content, spoken language is loosely packed, both to allow its audience time to process the content of utterances and as a result of real-time processing that a speaker faces. Speaking is dynamic and is operating under conditions that are substantially different from writing. This means that it does not always involve using grammatically complete and written-like sentences, because while written texts can be redrafted, spoken texts are results of one-shot production. Firstly, it is crucial for teachers to realize that spoken language is essentially different from the written one. Teachers, therefore, cannot expect their students to speak in full sentences as if, in fact, they were producing written texts, not only in this, not the way people speak in reality, but also expecting and requiring such skills from learners would place extremely high pressure on their speech productions for no reason at all. Speech expectations might result in the learner later reluctant or anxiety to speak. Teachers should help their students understand the important differences between speaking and writing and instruct them in the ways to use this knowledge effectively when speaking. For example, learners may be less hesitant to express themselves if they are shown that speakers string chunks of language together bit by bit without composing entire sentences in their minds before they start to speak. They may also find it useful to learn that repairs, hesitation, repetitions, and vague language are acceptable in spoken language, because without it, speech production would be made impossible. Consequently, all these aspects can be practiced in class through the use of meaningful tasks.